Hello, everybody. It is the Trek CC Period of Review 2015. This first one is Organized Play Events. I'm Alan Gould, coming to you from the Ruapenthe Penal Colony and Broadcast Center. And moving west around the world here, we have Michael Van Breenen, the Ninja Scott North American Organized Play Coordinator. We have Ken Tufts, the incoming Director of Organized Play. Then going across the ocean, we get to Matthias, who's the outgoing Organized Play Coordinator. And then wrapping back around, we have Thomas, the European Organized Play Coordinator. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
So it's mornings, evenings, and night times, depending on where folks are. So we'll keep this moving along. Matthias has an opening comment, so I will throw it over to him.
Okay. Well, before I start, an apology for Steve Hartman, the Australian Organised Play Coordinator, who couldn't be here because Google sucks for him. So, firstly, I'd like to just thank everyone who's attended an organised play event this year, whether it be a 4-player local or flying around the world to play a Star Trek card game. You're all wonderful, dedicated people and the lifeblood of this game. 2015 has been a challenging year. The introduction of Trek Masters to the high-level play calendar, challenges of maintaining successful organised play programs, running of just the second World Championships in Australia, major changes to the team over the last 12 months. As you know, Michael stepped in this time last year, took over from Dave Cook, and of course now with my handover to Ken Tufts, the incoming Director of Organised Play. One of my goals in this role was to empower the Continental Coordinators with more responsibility. And I'm happy to say in the 18 months, the last 18 months, we've seen profile of Thomas, Steve, and Michael since he came aboard improve dramatically. These roles should be seen as focal points of organised play in their respective continents, and I'm very happy to see that they have been. To that end, of course, the Director is able then to cover area neutral tasks, high-level management of the team, and of course be a senior voice in the decision-making process of organised play. The Trek Masters have largely been well received from the feedback I've received so far. Been some issues, without doubt. Things related to communication, event details, dates and venues and so on. So that's feedback we're taking on board, and with the view of improving things into the future to make the events more successful and mainstays of the championship circuit. I don't think it's a secret that there's still a disparity in the timeliness of the major event announcements, and it's something organised play is still working to get its act together on, and as the most recent team leader, I'll take full responsibility for any of this that has occurred in recent times. As an event, the 2015 World Championships extravaganza was a roaring success. Some new ideas were trialled, some worked, some didn't work as well, but as a package, somehow, when everything was put together, the event blew everyone's minds, and it made those hundreds of hours of volunteer time that went into every aspect of those 5 days really feel like they paid off. Really proud of the team, Steve and Kieran in particular here in Australia, and everyone else who's helped out in a large number of ways, from art to the rest of the OP team. And indeed, I think a lot of lessons were learnt from this Worlds and will affect future Worlds and indeed other high-level events in years to come. Um, as mentioned earlier, and in case you have been living under a rock and not listening to the last few minutes, you may not have known that I'm regretfully handing over my role of Director of Organised Play to Ken Tufts, who was selected selected by a panel from quite a number of very capable and enthusiastic candidates. I'll be working with Ken until January next year to hand over any outstanding and ongoing tasks that he is to be handling. Indeed, he is a very capable OP person, and with a strong team behind him, I've got no doubt whatsoever that OP is in very good hands.
All right, thank you. So we have, from the period of review survey, we're going to go through the questions for the tournament side of things. We will save the event ambassador stuff for another podcast when we have those people on. And the first group of questions was to do with local tournament feedback, things that are done right, things that are done wrong. First one under done wrongs, big one was that not all games were supported. Somebody's complaining that they don't get to run tribbles. And problems with venues. Is that something we can help with?
Well, support for games, all three games, is there. Was it any particular type of support you're referencing?
The comment they had was, let me see if I can pull up the full one, was finding the right venue, no tribbles played. And then there was a couple others on, I believe there was a mention, it might have been on a later question, about, it was a store, the director had set up the schedule in January for the entire year, and basically they got the store dropped them off the schedule without notice. So.
Yeah, and it's difficult, and that's a symptom of where the game is at the moment. Obviously, it's no longer a commercially produced game, so stores do have to question whether or not they can support a game like that, where their only income really is going to be sleeves, it's going to be food and drinks, snacks and drinks that they sell in the store, and maybe other secondary products. It's not an easy answer, and obviously OP can only do so much to support tournament directors. I think there's some, I guess, level of creativity maybe that needs to be employed when choosing a venue. Sometimes game store, a particular game store may not be viable. Look for others. Public libraries, I know it's not the most visible of venue, but you know, if you've got tables and chairs and you can advertise the events elsewhere, that's also handy. Food courts, you have markets that have card game retailers, collectible card retailers, but obviously no store floor space, but they have food court nearby. Certainly here in Australia, it's very commonplace to see the odd Magic tournament, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh still being run in the food court adjacent to the store. So it's a matter of just looking for other options. It is tough, and know that, but there's, I think the tournament director in question should have a look at what other options are available.
All right. The other interesting response I got was, and it was on the done things wrong by your local tournament director, was there was a mention of a tournament director who doesn't use the continuing committee website. They run everything off Facebook group. And I wasn't even aware that was, well, I'm not much of a Facebook guy. Do we worry about that, or is it a case of, hey, whatever floats the local boat?
I think that comes a lot down to we want track to be played, if it's being played, that's a good thing. If they want, I mean, if they want to be sanctioned events through the continuing committee, the tournament needs to be entered on our system. But there's nothing wrong with like casual local tournaments that are running through another advertisement source like Facebook or something. That just gives, I mean, the game's being played. That's ultimately the best thing. So it would be nice if it went through our system as well. And the only thing I can say would be more like talk to the local tournament organizer if they're not doing that and seeing if they're willing to do it, or send a message to me, with their contact information, and I'll reach out to them and see if there's a reason they're not doing it, or if I can convince them that, hey, why don't you put them in here too? People can get achievements, more free, more bonus advertisement for you.
All right.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to direct activity through the website. I know for a fact from the Sydney player group, though, they use Facebook as a planning tool and communication tool between people who may not visit TrekCC regularly and want a single place that they already visit on a regular basis for communication, and Facebook serves that purpose very well. I agree with Ken absolutely that it shouldn't be the only place, and we should be directing activity towards TrekCC. We should be getting tournaments registered and people participating in formal, sanctioned, organised play. However, Facebook can be a very good communication tool, and indeed I would even strongly encourage ambassadors and tournament directors and player groups to use it, but in conjunction with official TrekCC, the official TrekCC tournament system.
Right. Moving on to the done right section for locals, which actually had a fair bit of. Sorry, let me try that again. Had a fair bit of good feedback there. A lot of comments about making sure that there's something happening every month. There was one saying that they made sure that there's something every weekend. A lot of talk about hosting in their own home. They were mentioning it was so that they could say things they couldn't get away with saying in public, but hey, whatever works for you. A lot of talking with local players for suitable days, balancing fun and competitive tournaments. So there was a lot of good comments on there. I don't know if anybody wants to throw anything in with that.
No, all good points. All good points.
Okay. So then we will move along to the championship events. Let's see. There was one of the questions was, what keeps you from wanting to play in an event? A couple of comments on scheduling too far away, costs too much. That's going to be that's kind of an ongoing theme. We'll get to that. What factors would entice you to play in a championship event next year? Was winning the lottery and having more time. Yeah. So, as much fun as it would be to ask Ken how he plans to address, helping players win the lottery to go to championship events. Yeah. I'm not that mean.
Although, Ken, if you have any advice to share on how to win the lottery, please feel free.
Right after I win, I'll send that advice out.
Yeah, we'll take that offline. Yeah. So the questions on what entices you into getting to high-level events, higher competition, chances for buys, seeing folks you don't normally get to meet, and positive championship experiences was obviously meeting up with friends and winning. Yes, yeah, nothing's better than winning. So we'll get to the negative side of it. What can they do to improve championship events? Announcing dates further in advance, which let's go into that a bit, because part of it is just plain booking issues, isn't it?
Well, it can regularly be those real life issues, such as finding an event, finding a venue, sorry, for your event, where you can book, say, that far ahead, which has been an issue certainly when organising major Australian events. And I know, Thomas, you also have experience with the trials and tribulations of booking venues and
Yeah, it's basically what you said. I mean, we are not a big company. We cannot pay in advance, at least not a lot. We need to find something that is reasonably close to airports and to nice cities, but still fit our budget, which is pretty small, obviously. So it's not for lack of trying that we cannot announce stuff earlier. It's just for lack of finding something useful. But I think we're getting better. I mean, we have announced Worlds for next October already. Next September, I'm sorry. So we're getting better.
yeah, and it should be said that it is something that we have been actively seeking to improve, certainly over the past couple of years since I've taken over. I know last year things are a bit patchy in terms of some of the announcements, and that is something that we, while we don't have total control over things like venues, we do have control over some other things, and if we can at least improve on the timing and announcements, timing in those announcements, then at least that's one step closer to having more information out there as quickly as possible for people to start planning. And indeed, that's one thing that I'll be working with Ken to hopefully improve on into 2016 and beyond.
Yeah, it's absolutely going to be one of my main focuses, is making sure we keep announcements as far out from events as possible, so people have that opportunity to plan to get there if they need to.
We just had a comment in the chat room, which would be a good question to throw at you. So when we're talking about announcing beforehand, what would you guys consider to be the minimum that's needed before the announcement? Dates, venue, the actual schedule?
Dates and venue at the bare minimum, because you can actually, it's a lot easier to plan for both lodging to be close to the event, as well as when the event is. Kind of hard to show up at a place without knowing those things at the bare minimum. Schedule part can be altered, but as far as the other two, those kind of have to be fixed.
All right. The kind of related to that is there was a question to improve championship events by re-examining the one-day versus two-day continentals in Europe, which I think is probably South European responded on that one. And one of the side questions was, to throw out there, does 1E and 2E need to be the same format? Like, could you run a one-day 1E and a two-day 2E?
We could. It's all a matter of fairness. I can understand the 2E only players, because in the early days of TrackCC we had pretty much no 1E, so there was the 2E main event and maybe an evening event for the 4 players that actually showed up to play first edition. I'm pretty happy that these times are over and people start playing first edition again, and we get big first edition tournaments. The drawback of this is of course that we now need to schedule 2 big events on at maximum 3 days, which causes trouble. I'm not sure if there is the universal way of doing these things. It depends always on the exact venue. So last year Europeans in London, I think it was definitely justified that we had first and second edition same format, because we had very similar player numbers, if I'm not mistaken. We tried the same for Munich this year, and well, obviously it was a mistake, because we had, I think, 6 players for first edition. So in hindsight, it was, yeah, a 2-day second edition event would have been the better choice, but you never know in advance how many players you're actually going to attract. So at least from European perspective, we're still going to try to support both games as much as possible. And for the big events where you can expect similar numbers for first and second edition, we are definitely going to try to keep the format the same as much as is possible with the limited time frame we have available.
I think Thomas has hit that nail on the head there. You've got two considerations. You do have scheduling consideration, which is significant when you're talking about supporting, let's face it, we are supporting 3 championships every Continentals. We need to somehow fit Tribbles Continentals in, as well as a second edition, which may outdraw 1E and Tribbles. So that could mean that it takes priority and gets a more significant finals, as opposed to, say, just having final confrontation or no finals for first edition, just because of player draw, which is the second point. Considering your local player group, and this is where local knowledge is critical, and this is why the Continental coordinators are a critical component in the OP structure. To know your player base and to know that, look, first edition is going to get 2/3 of the player base or less. For instance, in Australia, we definitely don't have as many 1E players as 2E players. It's the 1E player group is a subset of 2E. Everyone who plays 1E plays 2E, but there are plenty of 2E players who don't play 1E. So we prioritise second edition here. That in the past has meant we've gone for, at the Continentals, a 2-day event for 2E, and 1E has just been cut down to a 1-day final competition maybe, or top of the table at the end of 4 rounds is the winner. So it's not a clear-cut thing, and it all depends on your area. But it's something that I think a decision we make subjectively when we're organising the schedule.
All right. This just I got messaged this just now. It was a question on do 1E Continentals have to be at the same time or location as 2E Continentals? Or what would be your opinions if somebody wanted to split those into separate events on separate weekends, say?
I don't think it's possible, because there are a significant amount of people that are playing both, and well, honestly, it's hard enough to organize one big event or one continental championship, having to find dates for two different events, having to find volunteers for 2 different events, having to find a venue for 2 different events, and pay for 2 different events. It's just not going to work. Especially the last part, the money issue. If we combine both on the same weekend, we get twice the starting fees. We can pay for nicer rooms, for better rooms. We can pay for better prices. So from my perspective, it's not an option. Sorry.
All right.
I completely tend to agree. You've got people that play multiple games. If you've got an event that's only running 1 game, you're going to lose a lot of people willing to travel to that event. It's just people are going to decide how to spend their money, and the overall majority of players, from what I've seen, and when I go to big events, are playing multiple games. There are a few that play 1 game only. There's a few that play the other game only. There's some that play just dribbles. But the majority of players are playing all 3 games. And you're going to lose a lot of those people if they have to travel for events that only cover one thing. And combine that with the cost issues, as Michael and Thomas mentioned, and yeah, it's they need to stay together. I think the thing going forward is to try and, for the top level events, Continentals and Worlds, is attempting to convince people that it's more than a weekend event. This is an event you come to that's going to be 3 or 4 days, or 5 days if it's an Australian Worlds. And if people are willing to show up for that whole time, we can spread stuff out a bit more. We can give a better schedule that allows day 1 and day 2 for both games, allows a little less overlap, allows a little more relaxing time. But it really just comes down to what are our players willing to spend vacation time on to come to. And, if they're willing to, for the top level events, spend a couple extra days, then we can look to schedule them over that. And in a way, have the events together but separate in that they don't overlap. And if you do only want to play one, you can choose to come for the specific days of that game and not stay for the whole time.
All right. That would lead into the last comment, or actually, sorry, second last, but leads into this one. One of the suggestions was better locations for Masters, which they defined as less expensive or hard to get to time-wise. Which probably is the better question for the panel here is, how do you guys pick out where Masters are held? Is that a consideration, or is it different criteria?
Well, at least for North America, the ones that I got to pick, so that would be Minnesota, Orlando, Chicago. Those are the only ones I got to pick, isn't it? Yeah. I did it based off of the size of the largest tournaments in the country at the time. So I looked for, but also for ones that are spread out throughout the United States. So the first place I went to was Orlando, and then Chicago, and then Minnesota, because I was only doing 4 Masters this year, and San Diego already had one of theirs in January. So for me, I used to look for ones that had a large play group of places, plus also places that are easy to fly into. Orlando is one of the cheapest places in the United States to fly into. Chicago is a hub for a good number of different major airlines in the United States, and Minnesota has one of, if not the largest play group, is individual play group in the continent. So for me, that was kind of a no-brainer. I tried to spread them out based off of different times of the year, so then it had a better chance of being able to draw travelers from beyond just that particular play group in order for people to attend. So in terms of that, it wasn't like it was an obscure place or anything like that. They were all major airports, and they were spread out across the United States to try to get as many different players to attend as possible. So in terms of the ones that I had control over, yeah, the schedule worked fine. I wouldn't have had two within a month of each other on 2 different parts of the continent, but they were arranged quickly to try and get as many Masters out as possible, which is why we had one in Maryland in December, and then one in San Diego in January.
I mean, certainly in Australia we only had one viable location for Trek Masters, so that was more or less a no-brainer. And I think, Thomas, in Europe you had 1 or 2?
We had one so far, which was probably the remote location that people were complaining about. For the European Masters, we tried to continue in an old German tournament series at this venue, just to get the Germans more excited to join us, because that's something they already know. And I mean, it was the first Masters, and nobody had any idea what Masters actually were about. So we tried to get it to connect it to the old German Grand Prix, which most German players have a lot of very fun memories of. It didn't work out. So I'm disappointed by the player numbers. I think we've spoken about this last year, and we are currently in discussions about a Masters for Germany next year, and we are definitely going to try to find a place that is easier to reach, a place that has its own play group, which Sellers sadly didn't have. So we have people there that can organize stuff and that are guaranteed to show up. So we are learning. We're trying to do better.
Okay. So moving off from championships more into Masters, one of the next question was, what is the biggest thing wrong with the Masters program? One thing that came up was there was complaints about the complexity between the Masters events and Nationals events, and in particular that Masters points are complicated and nobody really understands what's going on with them.
Well, the concept behind the Masters Points, in the inaugural 2014-15 season, simply was that they were based off the WCT League points table. So people who are familiar with the league will already be familiar with the point structure, at least have been involved in a program that has used it. The points simply were accumulated by players, and once a threshold was met, certain buys would be awarded. That was the I guess the limit of the complexity of Masters Points. There wasn't anything else to them in this inaugural season. Now, whether we expand on that or not, we're still in discussion of what we do with them into next year. The threshold was obviously chosen to limit the number of buyers to a certain number of them. Well, that is so we didn't overflow the marketplace, so to speak.
Oh, Matthias, we lost you.
Sorry. There we go. Are you there?
Yeah, we got you.
Sorry. Fiddling with the switch on the controller. I tend to fidget when I talk. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the I'm not sure what was the last thing you heard.
I think we only lost about a sentence.
Overflowing the market.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. So we didn't want to flood the scene with too many buyers, and we set a threshold according to what we felt would offer just that top echelon of players a chance at the buyers that were on offer. And looking at the list of people who have earned Masters Points this year and list of buys that have been earned, that is, people who've met the threshold of points, I think that has worked at limiting those numbers. Whether or not we stay with a threshold system into 2016 will be up to Ken and the team. I won't preempt any movement in that regard. Whether or not we change that into next year or leave any changes till down the track, I don't know. That'll be up to them. But it is still it's still a system that has a lot of room to grow, and that was the whole point of Trek Masters. We got the initial event type out there. The program works. It gets high-level play. It's been successful in North America predominantly. I think Thomas and Steve would both agree that it's probably been more successful in North America than it has in Europe and Australia. But that was kind of the point. And I think no matter where we go with it, it can only grow from here. And it's up to the team how they improve on it into the coming year. I'm not sure. Have we lost Ken? I was hoping to get his thoughts on it.
I'm still here.
You're not on.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I know.
There we go. Ken, do you have any thoughts on Trackmasters and into the future?
Looking at, I went to one of them in North America, and I've been following them very closely because I wanted to be at all of them. But it definitely, like in North America, they seem to be a pretty big success. And I think, like, the point thresholds going forward will be something we just constantly monitor and evaluate. It doesn't need to be easier to get a buy. It doesn't need to get harder. And how much points, how the points scale for the size of the event. That's something that can be constantly evaluated. and can be changed if needed. So I think we will continue to watch it and just see, where are we with it. I think the first year is a little bit of a growing thing, and starting this year, but it'll be more prevalent next year once we go through a full year of just Masters for that year, because this one had sort of the extra one tagged on, and see where we are, because now Nationals avoid Master points as well, and see where we end up at the end of the year. For example, is Europe awarding any buys at all? Is North America the only one generating buys from this? Does Australia have any hope of generating any buys from the Masters program? These are things we'll look at and use that to evaluate how do we need to adjust it. Australia, it looks like most likely would have at most one Masters, one Nationals awarding the points, and I want to see that. I definitely want to see both running, I'm hoping, going forward. But that might make it very hard for any players there to hit that threshold without traveling very significant distances. And that might be something we need to look at. Do we need to adjust the threshold a little lower so that those points have meaning to people that are in an area in a continent that's only going to have probably 2 events? And if we lower those thresholds, will it create 8,000 buys in North America? And I think once we have a full year of data collected, we'll be able to look at those numbers and really decide, is this where they need to be, and make adjustments at that point.
Or indeed, you could even try and do something else with the points. Just saying.
One other comment we had on scheduling for Masters is basically it was a complaint about timing. So there was why are we doing San Diego over New Year's weekend? Why are we sending people to Minnesota in November? I'm guessing that's a weather thing. But they do like Orlando in April. So is that something we worry about on when we schedule these things? Do we worry about the...
In terms of San Diego in January, it was done intentionally to go with their Phoenix tournament series, which is always that time of year. So that's why that was done and why Charlie picked that particular weekend to do. In terms of Minnesota in November, originally that was going to be in April, but I was told that the weather is worse in April than in November. So that is why it was done that way. The location was always going to be there. It was more of a question of which places are going to get what, and that's why. So, as far as going forward, I don't foresee having a winter-ish or fall-ish related one into a location where weather could become an issue, but this particular year, I am knocking on wood that weather-wise, everything in Minnesota will be fine, just gray and cold.
Fair enough. And let's see, for the greatest success for Masters, it pretty much boiled down to they're getting good attendance in the U.S. and everybody likes more high-level play. So does anybody have any more comments before we move on to the continental side of things?
Nope.
Okay. So there was a question, which was, where on your continent would you like to see future continental championships held? There was a couple common ones on the anywhere it's cheap to fly, and rotating between play groups. The Australian players voted Sydney, maybe Brisbane someday. Europe kind of split between Munich and Sweden. which apparently Sweden is a city now, I guess. And North America had some interesting ones. We had a lot of based on player groups: Orlando, Minnesota, San Diego. They also added Seattle, Atlanta, Cleveland, Chicago, and Washington. There was at least a couple of votes for Gen Con every year, Gen Con for all time. So what would your guys' opinion be if you guys were going to pick? Is there a different place that we're missing?
Well, first and foremost, I'll just jump in and say that not all of the answers, but I'd say many of them were, I don't know, maybe it's the question that was asked kind of was asking for it, but a lot of those answers were basically, hold it in my backyard, and they'll be sweet. So, yeah, I mean, some of them did raise some valid points along with their suggestion, and I know there were a few who believe that there should always be a major event at Gen Con for exposure purposes, and just because it's a I don't know, legacy location. We've always had a major event there, and so forth. But I think, yeah, I'm not sure what you can really take out of a question like that when you ask somebody involved in this community who wants to play in high-level events, who wants to attend. Not everyone can afford to travel to events, so obviously you want it as close as possible. But certainly, I think in Australia, you wouldn't have very many options other than Sydney to run the biggest events that you get here. Nationals and Trek Masters and whatnot may have some flexibility. For instance, Nationals coming to Perth in November. Sorry, the first weekend of December this year. But I think there's a few good things in there to take out in terms of North American high-level play, whether it be the Continentals or whether they be Nationals, Trek Masters locations.
All right, and Ken, I see you have a comment about events in San Diego.
Well, yeah. I mean, the San Diego's Masters didn't go over great for various reasons, I think. I think the scheduling, the lead-in time wasn't very high. It was a horrible weekend. I mean, right around time when people are already traveling for family, have probably already planned those trips by the time it was announced, stuff like that. But San Diego did run an amazing Continentals one year. And I think it's definitely a venue we'd like to see a big event at in the future. It's a pretty great place to go in the winter if you're in North America. It's got pretty nice weather year-round. And I definitely think I'd like to see something there. Who knows? Maybe we'll see Worlds there sometime in the future. If it's not at Gen Con, it's got to be somewhere else. And it tends to be at a time of year towards when certain parts of the country are getting cooler. So, or continent. Though most of the continent is sort of one country in terms of player numbers, at least. So, yeah, I definitely would like to see an event there in the future at some point.
Question on there was girls. Question about destination locations, basically to run Worlds somewhere that you can bring the spouse and the kids. And I think the idea is that it's kind of a stealth tournament. You're just going on holiday to Disneyland, and somebody disappears to go get a few rounds in. The other one was the suggestion to just kill. How they had it was to basically get rid of Worlds entirely and have a Gen Con championship instead.
Look, that was an interesting comment that was made about the whole concept of Worlds and its relevancy in this day of age of the Star Trek CCG tournament scene. And there is some I would say validity in that comment. You find, and this was something that had been raised ad nauseum in the last few weeks since our last, the weeks after the 2015 Worlds, in that these events are no longer world championships. I mean, you get traveling players, which Michael and Ken, as you can probably attest to, regularly a subset of the community who regularly travel, and then you just get basically the locals. So having an event with the title of Worlds brings a level of prestige to the event previously associated with the World Championships, when DeSaf used to run it and used to fly people in. And we don't get that anymore. There's no sense of getting high-level, top players from around the world. That doesn't happen anymore. And to expect that could continue in this era is just sheer folly. And getting rid of Worlds, I don't think it's too wild an ask, to be honest. But the World Championships, as it stands, continues to be a success as an event across the globe. Now, whether or not that would succeed if it was called something else, or if it was scrapped entirely and we made our continental championships the highest level event in each continent, whether that would work in the same way, I don't know. I know for a fact, based on experience, we've seen European Worlds score the highest number of competitors, in a record number of competitors in its tournaments. We've seen success in getting people into these massive Trek 5-day extravaganzas here in Australia. We've seen the way Gen Con went last year. These events are successful. I personally, and obviously it's my personal opinion, that if it works, don't mess with it. You can change it for the sake of changing it if people don't agree with the title, but the event is working. People play Trek not because there's a title. People play Trek because they like to play the game. And if they're playing the game, then why are we mucking around with an event just because we don't like the title? We should accept what it is and what is a success and work with that. And we're working and focusing our efforts on making that even more of a success, and indeed improving on the player experience.
Anybody else want to jump in? Thomas, I don't think we've heard from you in a bit.
I pretty much agree with what Matthias said. In a perfect world, we would have the funds to pay all the continental champions and all the regional winners a ticket to get to whatever venue is hosting Worlds. But Ken didn't figure out how to win the lottery. That's not going to happen. So it is, but it's still something. It's but what Matthias said, for the last World Championship in Germany, we have seen players I haven't seen for 5 or 6 years, just getting out of retirement, undusting their cards and trying to figure out how to play this game again, just to play one day of World Championship. We had some, I think 2 or 3 of the now most active European players started or restarted to play with the last World Championship, and it's just different. I think most people would not consider to fly to Australia or to Europe or to America just to play in their continental championship. But if they called it a world championship, actually it's the reason. You're not flying to some tournament, you're flying to the biggest tournament of the year. And I think we should keep it, really. It is a big thing, and why mess around with it?
Yeah, I completely agree. As someone who does travel to those big events, the fact that it's Worlds is a driving factor. It's the excuse you tell yourself. Go, okay, that's it. I'm going to go to this event. It's called Worlds. It's the single biggest event that moves around, and that's the one I'm going to travel to. I'll try to go to my own continentals, but planning a major international trip for another continentals is like, well, why am I doing that? I sort of ask myself. But it's Worlds. Oh, it's Worlds. That's the single biggest event of the year. It only happens, there's only one a year, and it moves around the world. And I find that, for me, is a big draw to make the extra effort to go out to that event. And the title of the event does mean something. Whether or not you win the title is totally separate. It's the fact that it's Worlds. And so I think the title does matter. Could we have other stuff? Possibly. Could Gen Con event become one of our main Masters locations for North America going forward? Instead of Worlds being there, it would be Masters Gen Con. I think that's totally possible, but there still needs to be a Worlds, and I think the idea of it moving around the world seems to work really well. I mean, it's used for different tools nowadays than it was in the past, maybe. If we're paying everybody to fly in, yeah, okay, that's all the quote-unquote best players that won their way there from other tournaments that have gotten free tickets. It's maybe not that anymore because we can't afford to pay everybody until I win that giant lottery. But now it's used for other things, used as a recruitment tool as well. I mean, the name will mean something, especially if you're like trying to recruit people from other games. It's like, hey, there's going to be a World Championships, and every 3 years, it's actually going to be on your continent. Whereas a lot of other games, the Worlds is always going to be in, say, North America. It's where a lot of the big CCGs are centered. So if you're not in North America, you're looking at always a cross-continental trip to try and go to Worlds. Whereas with our game, we can go, hey, look, every now and then, the big show is actually going to be reasonably close to you. You're not going to have to cross an ocean. And I think that name and having that fact acts as a recruitment tool. And trying to get more people into this game can't hurt anything.
Now, one bright spot was there seemed to be pretty solid agreement on the survey that Worlds should rotate every 3 years. All three of the questions about how often Australia and Europe and North America should host 3 years, every 3 years had a pretty solid majority. So I think we're kind of past that at least. Let's see here. Next one would be online play. And one of the interesting things that came up was that the satisfaction numbers for playing online via Skype was higher than playing via Lackey. How much do you guys play online?
I play probably more than anyone else on this panel.
I've played a bunch in the past. I don't play as much online now. I just don't have enough time. Much as I'd like to play more, we have a fairly busy local scene, so I kind of use that to feed my Trek addiction.
Yeah. So do you guys prefer Lackey over Skype or vice versa?
Well, you have in order to play an online tournament, you have to have both Lackey and Skype. The difference is that if you're trying to play with just Skype, then you're pretty much you can't see what your opponent's playing, which means you either have to write it out in front of you, or you have to remember it. And say, okay, well, you have these missions, and you have to remember what you put for, at least for 1E, you have to remember what you put underneath each one. Which means you have to write those things down. You can't. It's kind of hard to duplicate what you can visually see in Lackey. Granted, Lackey's got his own quirks and annoyances, to be fair, but it's, at least for me, it's easier for me to see what's going on than as opposed to having someone to just say, I have spent 2 counters on Bob, 3 counters on Sam, and then draw 2 cards. For me, but as far as being able to remember, oh, they're at this mission which has these requirements, that I don't have to look that up. It can be wonky with both, but I would prefer playing with both Skype and Lackey until we have a software of our own that we can make better. Because yes, Lackey is annoying. There's a lot of quirks in it, and if we could fix it, I would love to have that better, because online play is very awesome. But we just don't have the ability currently to have, hey, if we have our own software game to play our game with.
So the big question on there was, should there be a sanctioned high-level event online? So I guess so the pitch would be an online Masters or an online World, say.
I would be perfectly fine with that if it could be fixed in a couple of ways. So there's a couple of things with Lackey that makes that very problematic in terms of, especially in 1E, that if that were fixed, I would have absolutely no reservations whatsoever about having it. My concern is that someone would. There's a couple of reports as far as how to break Lackey to make it so that your games is much easier to win, and I don't want that to occur in a high level online tournament. If that's fixed, by all means, bring it on. I would love to see it.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that it's not new. It's been the idea's been floating around for a while. There's been a lot of pressure, particularly from those who do play regularly online. Look, initially, I had those exact concerns. The integrity of Lackey, Skype. It's just too easy to cheat. Recently, I've learnt that there are even more, there are better ways to cheat using Lackey, and which are quite scary. Look, I must admit, I was early in the year beginning to come around the notion of high-level play using Lackey. I felt that maybe the integrity of the player would prevent cheating and whatnot. But the more I learn, the more I've learned recently about how easy it is to not just cheat doing things that aren't necessarily tracked in Lackey, or that you can get away with without having a player literally in front of you, but the use of Lackey to cheat, I think just make it. It doesn't make it feasible for high-level play. I mean, there's no doubting the advantages of online play for players who don't have a local player group or can't play regularly. And Lackey and Skype are fantastic tools to help players network from outside their area, and test decks against people in different metas. But until there is a way to make online play less susceptible to exploitation for competitive advantage, so to speak, I wouldn't recommend that the CC consider, the OP department consider high-level online play.
Now, we do run online tournaments now. Have we had problems with people using exploits, or is the concern just when there's quote-unquote money on the line?
If there's been any reports, none of them have been sent our way. I definitely pay attention to something like that. But I'm more concerned about if there is quote unquote money on the table.
Yeah, from my viewpoint, I mean, I'd love there to be no way to cheat, period. That would be great. Perfect world. Not going to happen. Uh, but at least with local level events, it is. There isn't sort of those bigger prizes that make it more encouraged. Like they drive somebody maybe to want to do that more. And I think, I'd love to see online high level play because I think online definitely has its own sort of specific meta that, and I think there's a lot of players that don't have very strong local groups or no local group at all. And I would love to give that to them. I really would. But there's sort of different levels of potential cheating with Lackey. And I would love to think that no one will ever do it. But when you start talking about the higher level events, it's just if you can't guarantee a certain base level of integrity of the event, it calls into question every other, like all of organized play. If you're not guaranteeing that certain base level, then, well, if that events can have that, well, why don't we just let people do stuff like that at the in-person events? And yeah, I mean the pipe dream: win the giant lottery and pay somebody to make some specific software for us. But yeah, not likely to happen anytime soon, fortunately.
All right. So moving on, we have. Does that mean that's acting up? All right. So moving on, next issue is ratings, and the satisfaction with ratings was a bit hit and miss. One of the interesting ones was talking about high-rated players, and I think we have the perfect panel to ask about that, where it was that high-rated players can end up at a point where they can't lose or tie without losing a bunch of points, and that is forcing them to play competitive decks at locals because the penalty for losing a single game is huge. And Ken, if I heard right, didn't your rating go down while you won a tournament recently?
It's actually happened to me several times in the past. I think the best one was, I believe I had 2 wins and a tie and actually won the tournament but lost rating points. The system may not be perfect, but when you start getting into the really high ratings, it's very easy to lose rating points.
I mean, that's the way the ELO function works. It works to balance someone's ratings proportionate to the opponent being faced, factoring in the ratings and probability of you winning against that opponent. So it's mathematically it's designed to do that. Look, in terms of the rating system itself being appropriate for Trek in our day of age, it's questionable. You have to consider that comparing different isolated groups using the same rating system may not be the most accurate way to rank players. If you have players who are all interacting.
We lost you again.
Sound went away.
Sorry. You'll find that when you have players who are all interacting with each other, the function results in a more accurate representation, more accurate set of ratings for those people. But those isolated groups are basically just playing against themselves. I mean, certainly here in Australia, I know we have recently and in the past looked at ratings in isolation for Australian players, and indeed, if you do that, you'll find that there seems to be a distribution where you're not seeing, because of the competition here in Australia, which I believe is more or less even with a great majority of the players, you're seeing lower ratings in general. I haven't graphed them, but I'm sure there would be a fairly even distribution around the 1500 mark. So, look, it's not perfect for what we've got. Do we want to change the entire rating system now? It would mean losing basically all historical data, or at least not having the ability to directly compare old ratings and new ratings easily. But I think it's a given that ELO is not designed for ratings comparison between different isolated groups.
Now, a related part of that would be, do we put too much focus on ratings? Like, do you guys feel that people, like we have the ratings tracked week over week and such, is that forcing players to play quote-unquote competitive decks at small events? Like, would that be causing a problem at local tournaments, because a new player showing up is going to run into someone who is, because they can't afford to lose a game and lose rating points, is playing their Worlds deck week in, week out?
It honestly depends on the person who it is. I know for me, I could care less. I would like to do what Ken did and got over 2,000 in one tournament and never have to worry about it ever again. But as just for me, I could care less. I'm perfectly, and if you ever look at any of the decks that I play, they're rarely the same thing twice. They're usually for an achievement or 2 or 4 or 6. And if I win with it, great. I'm a happy camper. If I don't, and even if it's losing to Ken, I'm perfectly okay with that, at least sometimes. But for me, I don't even pay attention to what my rating is. I get actually rather surprised when people tell me what my rating is. But if you're the type of person who needs to win all the time, it wouldn't matter if there's a rating thing or not. They just get that rush of winning a tournament, and whether we have a rating system or not, that's completely irrelevant for them, because all they care about is the W. So for me, it's not really a necessarily anything I care about in terms of whether we have a rating system or not. For me, it's more of, if you're the type of person who needs to win every single tournament, that's the person that's not really something an OP can fix. We can't fix personality. We can only fix what system we have in place, and for them, I don't think that's going to matter. So as a result, I don't think ratings are that important, and for some people it is, but I'm not one of them.
Does anyone else have a comment on that?
Sure. I think I look at it, much like Michael said, the people who want to win and care about rating, they're gonna care about the win just as much, and they're gonna play that deck anyway. Having a rating system won't affect that. How I look at ratings, I look at them as very much as ratings are what happens when you play. I find it very entertaining to watch what happens with my rating as I, win tournaments and drop rating points, stuff like that. I find that really funny. The only reason I cared about ratings really, and I don't anymore, was to hit the top achievements for them. So that was what I cared. I cared about the achievement side of it than the ratings themselves. I really did find they're very entertaining. I like to watch what happens with them. I don't really care what happens with them. I think it's entertaining. To me, it's a source of entertainment. And can the system change? Possibly, if we find something better. But I mean, it's a pretty major thing to make any significant changes at this point, because you have to look at, well, do we start it new, or do we try to go back and compile everything that's happened into it? And it's a pretty big task if you look at it that way. And if you're starting fresh, well, what happens to all the people that have been playing for a while, right? So I don't know. I don't think there's a simple solution, but I know it's something we're definitely discussing, and it's been discussed publicly on the boards. And I can say we're definitely talking about, is there something that needs to happen, and if so, what?
And that brings up another question here. The question was, if we were to implement a filter on the ratings to show active players, how long can you go without playing before we stop considering you being active? And the poll grouped roughly around the 10 to 12 month mark. So is that something that we should look at to say, hey, if you haven't played in a year, I'm not even sure what that would do mechanically, how ELO works. Like, do you just start ignoring them? Do you start bleeding off their points to refill the ELO pool? Basically, I guess the root question would be, if somebody goes up, gets to 2,000 rating, and then just never plays again, do they sit at the top of the ratings for the rest of their days?
Well, let me just briefly comment on the background of this. Ratings is something that has been on the agenda with the Department of OP for a while now, and it got to a stage where, after discussion, we came down to two options, the way we saw it. First option would be to have some sort of decay on ratings, and the second option would be to have filters or secondary, basically filters predominantly based on activity, hence the question of what length of time would you consider to be valid for an active player. The problem we have is that any mention of recalculating ratings in our database would have Chris jumping up and down till his face is blue. The sheer load on our server to do such recalculations just wouldn't make it feasible. So the decay option kind of fell by the wayside, and it came down to whether or not we want an active filter or not. Now, the question becomes what determines your length of activity or inactivity, and if we do apply such a filter, we promote it as the standard rating, for instance. Say that this is the new gold standard we want everyone to compare themselves against, and the lifetime option is there just as the year to date, the year's filter, and run with that. So look, it's a good idea from the point of view that you have a comparison with players who are currently playing, as opposed to players who, like I guess this is all down to one man, Chris Clark, and his 2100 something rating in 2E lifetime, and guys like Neil Timmins who can't get to that stage just because Chris won an extraordinary number of tournaments and games that got him to a level that no matter how hard these guys try, they're just not going to get to that stage or to that ranking. So, and that's fair enough. Some people don't care about rankings and ratings, but there are people that do, and indeed there are people who've been turned off by our rating system because it hasn't really accommodated what they've wanted or looked for in the rating system. So, look, definitely, it needs some sort of change. Where that goes from now will be up to the OP team, but I totally agree that we need to make a change with that, and I think the community has well and truly spoken in the last 12 to 18 months as to its displeasure of the current rating system. Whether or not this will fix everyone's problems and make it satisfactory for everyone, probably not. You can't please everyone, but I think at the very least we can make it a system that is more applicable to, I guess, today's player, with who's an active participant in tournaments and who wants to rank themselves against people who are actually playing.
All right. Well, we're starting to get to the end of the time, so I have a handful of just short questions, which we could call them lightning round, or we could call them just people throwing rocks through windows. But I'm just going to blitz these out here, and folks can jump in. Was Australian Worlds a success?
Yes.
Yes.
Why was there no announcement about Worlds streaming?
Because I didn't know if it would happen or not. It's I know you want me to keep this short, but basically I was meant to test this out at the Continentals. I couldn't make it to the Continentals for personal reasons, so I had to go with the Worlds. I did some trial runs, but obviously not knowing what would happen until the day, I didn't want to raise expectations and not meet them by advertising something as amazing as streaming games live until I was absolutely sure we could do it. That is, it was actually streaming. So the best I could do, Twitter of the URL tweets were the announcement. Obviously, going forward, if we can get this happening at other events, it will definitely be something that will be, I'm sure organisers will advertise ahead of schedule. And certainly here in Australia, I think I've got the gear. We're probably going to be doing it for our major events going forward.
Very cool. Michael moved to Washington, Ken's in Vancouver, and now the high-level events are happening there.
Nationals for U.S. Nationals for this year was determined before I even took the job. Justin got the approval for Nationals before I took the position, but I had just moved out here about 2 months before that, so yeah, that's not really. I had nothing to do with it.
I'd love to see another Canadian play group able to host Canadian Nationals. That would make me delighted. Until we have a group that's stepping up to run a Nationals level event somewhere else in Canada, I'm gonna step up for Vancouver and put my money into running an event that will hopefully attract some people. And it's the single big Canadian play group, unfortunately, right now. So it's gonna sort of keep happening here. because it's the only real location. It's really unrelated to whatever positions I might have. I've run the last 2 or 3, something like that. And yeah, I mean, it'll keep happening here because there isn't anywhere else to go, unfortunately.
I mean, these conspiracy theories, they sound sexy and they're just total crap. There's a lot of water that has to go under the bridge to get these events organised, and it's not a case of let's bring it over to our backyard and take it away from any other legitimate hosts. That's just nonsense.
Okay. And then contrary-wise, is North America being ignored?
How is North America being ignored? That's my question to that question.
Fair enough. In the contrary to the Australia Worlds of Success, was Master Chicago a disaster?
Me not realizing that there was a regional schedule for the same weekend. Yes, that was a complete and total disaster, and that is completely entirely my fault because I didn't remember it. I was told by my Michael when it was going to be, and I thought I had looked through my list, and I apparently missed the last part of May because there wasn't a whole lot of ones in the later part of May in North America. So I was thinking, perfect, I somehow managed to get this around. Awesome. And then I completely botched that. So that, in that respect, yes, complete and total disaster. The events themselves, no. But me, yeah, totally me.
And just a reminder that we are human. I mean, we do our best. We do our absolute best. There's a lot of things that do happen, and unfortunately, if we do make a mistake, please forgive us. It's not intentional. We're not. We don't not care about events. It's just that there's a lot on our plates. We are volunteers. I know it sounds like I'm just making excuses, but just bear with us. We do the best we can given the circumstances, and I think given the organised play that we do have every year, I think the team does a fantastic job.
Okay, and the last one I had here was, what event should be held at Gen Con?
I have, as long as it's a high-level event at Gen Con, that will make me happy. Whether that is Worlds or Continentals or Masters or what have you, that is definitely up for debate. But there needs to be a high-level event at Gen Con pretty much every year until Gen Con decides to go crazy and not have it anymore. That's what I'm going to take from that.
All right. And then I'll throw it to you guys. Is there anything you guys want to bring up or cover before we close up shop for the day?
Don't forget Worlds 2016 in London. I hope to see everybody there.
Definitely.
Yeah, look, I'd just like to say, given that, this is going to be my last period of review, and indeed this is my last major duty as a member of the continuing committee. Just have a few things just to quickly cover off before we close. Firstly, I just want to thank Charlie and the rest of the various current and retired members of the continuing committee for their support of my time on the CC all the way back to 2007. I'd especially like to thank all the members of the OP team, current and past. Every one of you, without exception, has been special to me in your own ways. Look, regretfully, I have to step back from the position, and I'm certainly not going to be lost to the community. I've taken up a role as ambassador, local ambassador here in Western Australia, region Deep Space Station K7, and we'll be working basically at the grassroots to rebuild the player base, the local player base. So, just one last thing. Look, in my time running and coordinating Star Trek CCGOP, particularly in Australia, since 2003, I've really come to appreciate that this is truly the greatest gaming community in the world, especially now when there's no big cash prizes. There's no reason for you to, Ken, Michael, Amber, and everyone else who travels to events, there's no reason for you guys to fly all the way across the world to play, but you do. Look, in this time of decline, 8 years post-Decipher, with an aging player population going off and doing silly things like breeding and getting jobs and having lives, I guess we as a group of people across the globe who share a common interest of fighting a battle to keep this game alive into the future. All I ask is that each and every single one of you out there watching this, either live now or on YouTube later on, whether you play casually, competitively at tournaments, whether you play just because it means you get together with friends you made while playing this game, friends who you'll probably have for life, certainly long after continuing committee's forgotten. For whatever reason, one thing is for certain, that this game has united us all. And I just want everyone to do their utmost best to keep the dream alive, because it's been a bloody awesome journey, and I'm hoping that this won't be the end. I know this won't be the end for me in this community, and certainly with the Nationals coming up and a whole crew of people flying from Sydney, I know it's going to be an awesome time, and just another reason why I love this community so much.
Well, thank you. Well, so this will bring the events and events planning portion of the period of review to a close. I'd like to thank everybody for coming in. Ken, Matthias, Michael, and Thomas. It's always fun getting everybody from around the world in a chat room at the same time. And our next period of review will be next Sunday, November 1st at 1 p.m. Eastern, so same time as now, just next Sunday. And that will be public relations, to go over websites and social media. So I hope to see you guys there. And until then, this period of review is over.